Okay, so remember I told you yesterday that we're going to have to learn how to change our equation around so it does look like this equation. Remember that? That is y equals mx plus b. And the reason for that is because if it's in this format, it's going to be easy to graph. Okay? So remember that what we're talking about equations of lines. Lines mean it's a straight line. It's going to look like this, right? Look like this, right? We're going to have to know how to graph these lines properly on the grid. So in order for us to be able to graph, if it's in the y-intercept form, it's very easy to graph. Well, it's easier to graph, I should say. Okay? Remember that we call this slope y-intercept form. Okay? When you're looking at the equation, you're going to have y equals number x plus a number or minus a number. This letter m and this letter b, they mean something. The letter m is called the slope of the line. Okay? When I say slope, I mean steepness. So how steep is my line? Is my line going up? Is my line going down? So the slope means the steepness of the line. Okay? The b value that is added or subtracted, it's the y-intercept. So it's where the y-axis and the line intersect. So it's where the line intersects the y-axis. So if I have my grid and I have this line, okay? The grid is, this is your x-axis on the grid, and this is your y-axis. They never change. X is always the horizontal, y is always the vertical, okay? You see that blue line? Where is this blue line intersecting your y-axis? So this blue line, where is it cutting the y-axis? Right here? Yeah. So this is called the y-intercept. Okay? So this is represented right here in that value of b. Okay? So that value of b is going to tell you where your line is going to intersect your y-axis. So, two things that we need to know when it's in this format. We need to know the slope, and we need to know the y-intercept. Okay? So, let's look at the first equation. So, it's asking you to state the slope and the y-intercept of the following equations. So, the equation is y equals 3x plus 6. Does this look like y equals mx plus b to you? Does this look like this? Does it have the same format as this? Yes. Y is by itself. You have the equal. You have a number times x plus a number. Okay? What does m equal to in that equation? 3. Right? So m and 3, right, they're equal to each other. In this case, that means your slope, because we said that m is the slope of the line. Yeah? So that means the slope is equal to 3. How about your y-intercept? What's your y-intercept? B, which is 6, right? because you have something x plus something, okay? That something x, that first something is the slope, which is the 3. And the 6 is replacing the b, which is your y-intercept. So in this case, your y-intercept is equal to 6. Okay? You have to be able to identify these so you can graph later on. Okay? Yeah.
If b is y and m is x, or m is m, what's going on with the letters? I'm confused.
Okay. So if you look at this, y is going to always be y, and x is going to always be x. Okay? Y and x, they have to be. This is how you know it's an equation, when you have y and x in the equation. Okay? Now, when it comes to the other letters, when it comes to m and b, they're going to be numbers. Okay? So m represents the slope of the line, so how steep your line is. Okay? And b represent where the line is going to intersect the y-axis. This is what they represent. So when I have values, right, this value that comes right before the x, that's multiplied with the x, is replacing the m. And the other value, which is added to the x term, is replacing your b.
I just got confused when you were saying the y, whatever that is.
Y-intercept? Yeah. Y-intercept is the b. B means the y-intercept. That's what it means. Okay? So if you're looking at your second equation, can you tell me what your slope is? 1 over 2, because there's a negative that you probably can't see here. Okay? So yeah, you're right. So this is your slope. The number that comes right before the x, that's multiplied with the x, that represents your slope. So slope is -1 over 2. How about your y-intercept? What's your y-intercept? -1. You see how it's supposed to be a plus, right? But because in this case it's a minus, I have to state it with my y-intercept. So that means my y-intercept is equal to -1. Okay? You're going to use this information, again, I'm going to say that again, you're going to use this information to be able to graph. If you don't know how to identify the slope and the y-intercept, you won't be able to graph. Are we okay with this? Okay? Why do I feel like I'm missing a page here? Can I see your... Actually, I have them here.
The blue paper?
What page is that? Page 2 and 3. Okay. So, what does the slope represent when it comes to graphing? I'm just going to add a page here. You can write it whatever you find spots to write. So when it comes to the slope represents rise over run. Okay? So I'll tell you exactly what that means. Just make sure that you remember this formula. When I talk about rise, when you're talking about rise, what do you think about? What does rise mean? Going up or going down, right? So rise means up or down, right? So let's say if you are at this point, and I tell you that you're rising up by 1, right? So that means you are going from here to here. You're jumping up by 1. That's what rise means, okay? How about run? Over. right? So the rise is up and the run is over. Okay? So when you're looking at your slope, the slope means if it's a fraction, right? What was my slope for the previous one? -1/2? That was my slope. Okay? What does that mean if I want to graph? That's right. So that means you're going down 1 because it's a minus. Okay? And then this means you're going over. We're always talking about over to the right.
When you say over, you mean just like left and right?
Yeah, to the right. Okay? So if I'm starting at this point, if I'm starting to at this point, to find my next point, if I have this slope, I have to go down 1. So I went down 1. And I have to go to the right 2. So that's 1, 2 to the right. And this is where would be my next point. Okay? I can keep repeating this to find my next point. So I have to go down 1 over 2. That would be my next point. Down 1 over 2. And if you look at this, these points, if I follow exactly the same trend over and over and over and over again, they're going to form a straight line, right? They're forming a line. So I'm keeping that pattern that tells me I have to go down 1 over 2. So I start with my point. I'll tell you which point later on. And then I follow the trend of my slope. My slope says you're going to have to go down 1 over 2. Okay? So I go down 1 over 2, and I locate my next point. It's like when I give you direction, I say, take 5 steps to the right and then 2 steps up. Like I'm giving you direction. In this case, my direction are go down 1 to the right 2. You find your point. Down 1 to the right 2. You find your point. Your points should, if you're doing the right thing, your points should line up on a straight line. Are we okay with this? Now the question is, where's my first point? How can I find my first point, or where do I start? This is where the y-intercept comes in. I start from the y-intercept. Because from my equation, I know that this is the slope. And I also know that this is the y-intercept. Okay? So my first point, the point that I know, is my y-intercept. So here's how I would graph this. So you'll have the grid. So your y-intercept is at -1. Remember that the y-intercept is on the y-axis. Where would -1 be on the y-axis? Right underneath the center. So the center is going to be 0, 0. Right? So the center is 0, 0. The -1 is going to be right here. Okay? Because this is what the y is. The y is, this is 0, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if you take the x, this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, so on. And this is going to be the negative. Okay? So if I'm looking at the y-intercept of being -1, it's going to be right here. So that is your first point. This is where you're starting from. Okay? So I start at the -1, and the slope tells me, what do I have to do? What does the slope tell me I have to do? Go down 1 to the right 2. Okay? So from this point, I'm going to go down 1, and then 2 to the right, and then here's where my next point is. Okay? Can I find another point? I have to follow exactly the same trend. I have to go 1 down, and then 2 to the right. Look where I ended up, right here. Okay? You can do it one more time. Go 1 down, 2 to the right, you're going to end up right here. So do my lines line up? Do they form a line? Do you see them lining up? Yes, they do. That means I didn't do any mistakes. I don't have, technically, if I'm following the right thing. Yes, I don't have any mistakes. Okay? So the first thing you have to do is you have to locate your y-intercept. And then the second step is use the slope to find the next point. Points. And that's why it's important to know how to locate your y-intercept and how to locate your slope. Like, what are they? To know what they are. Okay? Copy these notes, and then we will do an example together